Snow fell like sifted flour over the wooden roofs of the town, quieting even the raucous sound of the saloon. The boards of the main street shone pale with frost, each plank echoing with the hollow crunch of boots that hurried past her. She moved slowly, shawl drawn close around her shoulders, lashes heavy with the weight of snowflakes that clung and melted into cold rivulets down her cheeks. No one spoke to her as she passed. Men lifted their collars higher against the wind. Women gathered their skirts and children in close, eyes darting away as if her shadow carried a sickness. The world of the frontier was never kind, but in her silence and foreignness, she bore a heavier winter than most. She had come west with hope once, crossing oceans and deserts of land, her heart steady with dreams of building something new. The railroad had needed hands, the mines had needed backs, and the scattered towns had needed seamstresses. She was a seamstress before she was anything else, thread and needle her inheritance. But hope wears thin when doors are never opened, when kindness is always wrapped in suspicion, when your face is the one people whisper about. She found herself in the snowy settlement because the work was steady enough, the winters hard enough that few stayed long, and the loneliness was so complete it almost seemed natural. Almost. At night, she worked by lamplight in her narrow cabin at the edge of town. The wind howled through the shutters, carrying with it the scent of pine smoke and the distant bark of a dog. She stitched coats for children who never waved when she passed. She hemmed trousers for men who never looked her in the eye. Coins were pressed into her palm quickly, without touch, without thanks. Thread slipped between her fingers, red and blue and brown, her hands deft, her movements patient. Every garment carried warmth she herself never received. In town, words floated through the air like ashes. No man will have her. Strange blood. Better she keep to herself. She heard them, always heard them, though her head remained bowed. There had been one man once, a widower with kind eyes, who had asked if she might share a meal. She had cooked, had smiled shyly over the steam of broth, but the next day his sister had seen them and tongues had wagged. By week's end, the man withdrew. He avoided her in the street. She told herself she did not mind, though her chest felt hollow for weeks after. Children learned quickly from their parents. They tugged at each other's coats when she passed, whispering, staring with eyes too sharp for their age. Some threw pebbles once, laughing when she flinched. She had no family here to defend her, no friends to soften the blow. So she walked on, eyes lowered, every insult swallowed like medicine too bitter to name. She had endured worse before, the voyage, the hunger, the back-breaking labor in kitchens where she was treated like smoke, useful but unseen. Yet the cold of this town seeped deeper because she had thought, foolishly, that here she might finally belong. One winter evening, she delivered mended shirts to the preacher's wife. Her work was fine, the stitches neat, yet the woman barely opened the door wide enough to take the bundle. "Leave them there," she said quickly, as if the cold air was preferable to the warmth of her presence. Coins clinked onto the threshold. Not into her hand, never that. She gathered them silently, bowed her head, and walked back into the snowfall. Behind her, the door closed fast, shutting out not the cold but the sight of her. The streets were nearly empty that night. Lanterns glowed faintly in windows. Yellow light pressed against the glass like fragile warmth that would never be hers. She stepped carefully over ice, the snow crunching under her boots. In the saloon, laughter rose, spilling into the night, followed by a man's harsh voice. "That Chinawoman will die alone, mark my words." A burst of laughter followed, raw and careless. She felt her stomach twist, but did not slow her steps. To answer would be to invite more cruelty. Silence was her only defense. Her cabin greeted her with its stillness. She lit the lamp, trimmed the wick, and sat at her small table. The air smelled faintly of oil and wool. She placed the coins neatly into a jar and set her hands on the cloth she had been mending earlier. For a long time she only stared at the stitches, her needle resting idly on the fabric. Her reflection wavered faintly in the darkened window, a face both familiar and strange. Lines had begun to form where she once had smoothness, and though she was not old, loneliness had aged her. She thought of her homeland, where once she had been a daughter among many, laughter filling courtyards, meals shared with noise and warmth. All that was gone, oceans away. Here, her life was silent enough to hear her own breath echo against the walls. She sometimes whispered words aloud, just to break the hush. "Perhaps I was born to remain unseen," she murmured into the lamp's glow, her voice fragile as a flame. The days that followed were marked by sameness. She stitched, she delivered, she endured. Snow piled higher along the street, burying fence posts, softening the hard lines of buildings. Each morning she swept her doorstep, though few ever came near. The townsfolk went about their lives, families gathering, children racing through drifts, men tending stables. She was always apart, a figure who did not fit into the painting of the town. Even when she stood among others, she felt like an outline uncolored. Once, at the general store, she reached for flour only to hear the clerk mutter under his breath, "Best keep it for our own." He handed it over nonetheless, but the sting remained. She carried the sack back through the snow, pressing her lips together, holding back the ache that threatened to spill as tears. She could never let them see. To cry before them would be to give them proof of her weakness, a confirmation of every cruel whisper. Yet for all the hardness of the town, she could not entirely kill the ember within her. On her table, she kept a small box of colored papers brought from far away. At night, when her hands were not burdened with others' garments, she folded them into cranes. Dozens of them perched on her shelf, fragile birds waiting to take flight. They were her secret companions, tokens of a gentler world. Sometimes she imagined them carrying her loneliness into the sky, scattering it like seeds over the mountains. The first crack in her routine came on a night when the wind was sharp enough to slice through cloth. She had returned from delivering work, her shawl dusted white, when she heard laughter in the street behind her. It was not cruel laughter this time, but the sound of children at play. She turned her head just enough to see them. 2 girls, identical in face and form, chasing one another around a lamppost. Their boots splashed in slush, their cheeks flushed from the cold. No mother's hand guided them. No father's voice called them home. They were alone, yet their joy glowed bright against the frost. She felt her chest tighten, watching, though she quickly lowered her gaze when others passed. She had no right to linger near children, not when the town already whispered so cruelly. Still, their laughter followed her into her dreams. That night she dreamed of small hands clutching hers, of voices calling her name not with scorn but with need. She woke with tears frozen against her lashes, her heart aching with a longing she had no words for. The following week brought heavier snow, storms that pressed the town into silence. Smoke rose from chimneys in dark plumes. Horses stamped in barns, restless with the cold. She carried out her tasks as always, shawl pulled tight, eyes lowered. Yet as she crossed the churchyard one evening, she paused. There, near the stone wall, dusted white, stood the same 2 girls. Their shawls were thin, their mittens ragged, and they huddled together for warmth, their breaths fog in the air as they clutched each other's hands. For a long moment she only watched, her heart twisting. Then, before she could stop herself, she stepped closer. The older of the 2, though only by a heartbeat, lifted her gaze. Wide eyes met hers, unguarded. The girl's lips trembled, and she whispered softly, as if confessing a secret, "Are you cold too?" The question startled her. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Slowly, she knelt in the snow, her knees pressing into frozen earth, and she pulled her shawl from her shoulders. With trembling hands she wrapped it around both girls, drawing them close into its thin warmth. They smelled of pine smoke and winter air, their hair tangled with flakes of snow. For the first time in many years, she felt another's weight against her, fragile yet real. Behind her, footsteps echoed, someone passing, casting a sharp glance. She could hear the disapproval in that silence, the way judgment clung heavier than the snow. Still, she did not let go. When she returned home that night, her shoulders bare to the wind, she felt a warmth lingering against her chest, as though the small body she had held still pressed against her. The cabin was as empty as ever, yet the silence felt different, thinner, less absolute. She sat at her table, fingers tracing the folded cranes, and for the first time in many years she allowed herself a fragile smile. Outside, the snow continued to fall, cloaking the town in white. But within her, something stirred, an ember refusing to die. She did not yet know what the girls would mean, nor how the town would tighten its noose of gossip, nor how loneliness would shift into something new and dangerous and beautiful. All she knew was a memory of two small voices, breath clouding the air, asking a question she could not shake. "Are you cold too?" And for the first time in years, she whispered an answer into the dark. Yes. The storm rolled heavy across the plains, carrying snow in waves that blurred the horizon into a white veil. Days had passed since she had first seen the two girls by the churchyard wall, their hands locked together, their breaths clouding in the bitter air. She had thought of them often, wondering who cared for them, wondering how two such tender souls could stand alone in a world where even grown folk faltered. Loneliness had carved its place in her heart long before. Yet when she thought of them, it no longer seemed like her burden alone. The memory of their faces trailed her with every step, fragile as snowflakes that refused to melt. On the sixth night after, the snow thinned, and the town gathered at the church for prayer against a fever that had taken so many. She lingered outside, too aware of the stares that followed her when she dared cross the threshold. It was then she saw them again, two small figures curled against the church steps, too weary even to shiver. The younger had her head on her sister's lap, eyes closed, lashes silvered with frost. The older kept her gaze fixed on the door, as if waiting for someone who would never come. She stood in the shadows, torn between caution and a pull she could not name. The bell tolled, its iron voice echoing across the snowy street, and in that sound she heard her own heart pounding. Slowly, she walked forward. The snow whispered under her boots, each step heavier than the last. When the older girl noticed her, she did not shrink away as children often did. Instead, she stared with solemn eyes far older than her years. "You," the child whispered, voice thin against the wind. "You gave us your shawl." She knelt, her fingers trembling as she reached to brush snow from the younger girl's hair. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. The older girl swallowed hard, then answered with the honesty only children carry. "We have no place." Her chest tightened. She looked toward the church doors, expecting a mother, an uncle, someone to come. But no one did. The hymn rose inside, voices strong and sure, while the two children sat forgotten on the steps. She drew in a sharp breath, the cold searing her lungs. "Come," she said, rising to her feet. "You should not stay in the snow." They hesitated only a moment before the older one rose, pulling her sister with her. Their hands found hers, small and cold. For the first time in years, someone reached for her without hesitation. She led them across the square, heads turning as they passed. The weight of those stairs pressed down on her shoulders, but she held her head steady, guiding the children to the storm as though shielding them with the force of her silence. Her cabin was humble, its walls thin, its roof patched with boards she had hammered herself. Yet when she opened the door and ushered them inside, it seemed to her more than it had ever been. The girls clung close to the warmth of the lamp, their faces glowing amber in the light. She stoked the fire with careful hands, placed a pot upon the stove, and ladled what little broth she had left into bowls. They ate quietly, spoonfuls clinking against tin. Watching them, she felt her heart stretch, as though it had been bound and now dared to loosen. When the younger girl finished, she looked up shyly, broth staining her lips. "You're kind," she murmured. The woman lowered her eyes. "Kindness is only warmth," she answered. "And warmth is what I'll need." The days that followed bound them closer. The girls returned each evening as though the cabin called them. They came with cheeks red from the cold, mittens torn, hunger sharp in their bellies. She welcomed them without question, feeding them scraps of bread, sewing patches into their sleeves with swift fingers. Her needle sang late into the night, but the work no longer felt heavy. For once, the thread carried purpose beyond survival. Slowly, their laughter filled the room. It startled her at first, that sound, so light it seemed out of place against her silence. They made dolls from cloth scraps, their voices bright as they played. They asked her to teach them, and so she showed them how to fold paper into cranes, her hands guiding theirs until fragile birds perched upon the table. The girls marveled, holding them as if they were treasures, whispering to one another in delight. For the first time in years, she laughed, soft, startled, like a note struck after long silence. But not all saw these evenings with tenderness. Rumors began as embers, glowing beneath the surface. A man at the store raised his brow when he saw the girls by her side. "Stray cats," he muttered. "They'll only follow where they're fed." A woman at the well sniffed when the twins clutched her skirts. "Children should keep to their own," she said loudly enough for others to hear. And though the girls giggled and skipped, she felt the town's eyes sharpening. Still, the children clung to her. When they spoke of their parents, it was in fragments: an illness, a night of fever, a burial at dawn. Their words were tender, unsteady, as though they had learned to carry sorrow before they could spell it. She listened, never pressing, her heart breaking quietly with every detail. When the younger one cried into her lap, she stroked her hair until sleep softened her sobs. One evening, when the fire burned low and the cabin's shadows stretched long, the twins nestled close beside her. Snow drifted soft outside the window, muffling the world. The older girl lifted her gaze, eyes wide with fragile hope. "Will you be our mommy?" she whispered. The words cut through the quiet like a bell. Her breath caught. She looked down at their expectant faces, small and solemn. Her throat tightened with a pain she had no language for. 1,000 thoughts rushed. What would the town say? How could she provide? What if they too were taken from her? Yet above all was the warmth blooming in her chest, fierce and undeniable. She could not speak at first. Tears welled, slipping down her cheeks, glistening in the firelight. Slowly, she lifted her hands and drew them both close, holding them as though they were spun from glass. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper too fragile for certainty. I will try." The girls smiled then, their faces radiant, as though the snow itself had melted from the world. They burrowed against her, sighs of contentment filling the small room. And she sat there, heart trembling, wondering how a woman once deemed unwanted could suddenly feel so chosen. That night, long after they slept on her cot, she sat awake by the fire, her hands clasped tightly, her shoulders bowed. She knew the storm this would bring, the gossip, the disapproval, the judgment harsher than any winter wind. But she also knew this. For the first time since she had come to this town, she felt needed. She felt alive. The snow outside deepened, covering the roads, silencing the streets. But within the cabin, there was warmth. There were small breaths rising and falling in sleep. There were fragile cranes lying on the sill, waiting as though for flight. She sat watching the embers, whispering to herself the vow she had not spoken aloud. "They will not be alone, not while I draw a breath." And though she trembled with fear of the world's cruelty, she smiled softly, for she had heard the only words she had longed for, the words that thawed the ice around her heart. "Will you be our mommy?" She did not yet know the trials to come, the storm of voices that would rise against her, the weight of proving herself worthy of love in a place that denied her belonging. But she knew, as she rose and tucked the blanket tighter around their sleeping forms, that her silence had been broken. The snow would fall, the world would judge, but she had heard the whispers that would guide her steps. Outside, the night lay still, stars hidden behind clouds. Inside, 3 hearts beat in unison, fragile and steadfast, carrying a promise against the cold. The morning after the snowstorm broke, the town gathered like it always did when news smelled of scandal. The air was sharp with frost, and every boot that struck the boardwalk echoed louder than the last, as if judgment itself was marching to the center of town. Word had already flown faster than a hawk on the wind. The widow woman on the edge of the prairie had been harboring 2 children no one knew of, twins, pale-faced and thin, wrapped in the kind of hunger that told a hard, secret road. By the time the church bell rang, the main street of Red Hollow was thick with townsfolk. Men leaned against hitching posts with their arms crossed, women whispered from behind their bonnets, and children pressed against their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and restless. The saloon stood quiet, even its piano stilled, as if the whole town had agreed the day wasn't for drinking but for reckoning. At the center of it all stood Sheriff Amos Reed, a broad-shouldered man with lines carved deep into his weathered face. He had been the law in Red Hollow for near 2 decades, and though time had taken some of his strength, it had left him with a harder thing. patience that could boil over without warning. At his side, Deputy Clay was younger, sharper, with the restless edge of a man eager to prove himself. They weren't the only ones who had gathered. Reverend Halpern stood near the steps of the church, his Bible clutched like a weapon, his eyes narrow with a righteousness that had no room for mercy. Beside him was Mrs. Kettle, the matron who ran the mercantile, whispering venom into the ear of anyone who'd listen. And just beyond them, watching from a distance with his hat tipped low, was Silas Boone, a rancher whose fortune had been built on buying the land of folks too broken to keep it. He was a man who never missed a chance to turn trouble into gold. The widow, Lien, though most only called her the Chinese woman in tones that carried more suspicion than respect, was brought into the circle with the twins at her side. She held them close, one on each hand, her chin lifted higher than the stairs thrown like stones at her. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid. Her shawl hung heavy with frost, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that even the bitterest tongue could not strip away. The twins clung to her, their small faces tight with fear. One, the bolder of the two, whispered, "Don't be afraid, Mama," though the word trembled as it left her lips. The other said nothing, burying her face against Lien's side. The whisper carried, though, and the crowd stiffened at the sound of it, as if the title Mama confirmed what they had already judged. Reverend Halpern's voice cut through the cold air. "We cannot turn a blind eye. This woman hides children without name or kin, and the Lord's word warns against secrets steeped in sin. For all we know, she brought them from some unholy place, or worse, claimed them in ways no God-fearing soul should." Murmurs rose. The weight of suspicion thickened like the frost on the windows of the boarding house. Sheriff Amos lifted a hand for silence, his jaw tight. "Reverend, your scripture has its place, but this is the law's business, and the law asks first whose blood runs in these children." All eyes shifted to Lien. She met them without flinching. Her voice was steady, though the effort to hold it so was plain. "They're orphans. Their father died on the trail west, their mother with him. I found them near frozen in the storm. I could not leave them. It was the truth, but truth is a fragile thing when fear and prejudice press against it." Mrs. Kettle spat into the snow. "And we're to believe that? A widow living alone, taking in two little mouths no one's ever seen before? Mark my words, Sheriff, she's lying." "Why?" "It's just as likely they're hers, born in shame and hidden away till now. You think I ain't seen the way she keeps to herself, always walking the far side of the street." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. Deputy Clay stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver more from habit than need. "If she's lying, we'll find out. But until then, these children need a roof, and she's the only one who's given it. That counts for something." "Something," Reverend Halpern barked, "but not enough. We are a community built on order, not secrets. If she wished to be part of us, she should have come forth honest, not sheltered what is not hers." The twins pressed tighter to Lien, their fear raw and visible, and for a moment the crowd faltered. It was one thing to talk of sin and scandal, another to look into the faces of children who shivered in the cold. Sheriff Amos saw it, and he took his chance. "We'll not condemn without proof. I'll send word down the trail. See if anyone recalls a wagon lost in storm. Until then, these girls stay with the widow. Anyone with decency ought to remember she may have saved their lives." That might have been the end of it, had Silas Boone not stepped forward, his voice smooth as oil poured over rusted iron. "Sheriff, no one questions your fairness, but you know as well as I that a lone woman can't feed two more mouths, not through the winter. It'd be a mercy to place the girls where they'd have more than scraps. I've land, I've stock, and I've a wife who'd see they're raised proper. Hand them to me, and you'll know they'll be safe." The offer struck like a spark in dry brush. Some nodded, swayed by his wealth, others frowned, sensing the greed behind his words. Lien's hands tightened on the girls, her voice rising for the first time. "They are not yours to claim. They chose me, and I will not give them up." That defiance drew a sharp breath from the crowd. Few dared speak against Silas Boone, whose reach extended deeper than any law in Red Hollow. His eyes narrowed, a flash of anger passing quick, as lightning before his practiced calm returned. Careful, widow. Pride won't keep them fed. The standoff stretched, brittle as ice underfoot. Sheriff Amos broke it with a voice hard as hammered steel. Enough. The girls stay with her until I say otherwise. Any man who aims to change that will answer to me. His gaze lingered on Boone, unflinching. The crowd muttered, divided but subdued, and slowly they began to scatter, though their whispers lingered like smoke after fire. Some walked away shaking their heads, others glancing back with unease. But the judgment had only been delayed, not settled. As the street thinned, Lien crouched to the twins, brushing a stray curl from the younger one's face. "You must be brave," she murmured. "This town does not know us yet, but we will show them." The girls nodded, though the fear in their eyes had not faded. From across the way, Silas Boone mounted his horse with a smile too thin to be called kind. He tipped his hat toward Sheriff Amos before riding off, leaving behind the promise of trouble yet to come. Reverend Halpern lingered by the church steps, his lips moving in prayer that sounded more like a curse. The sun dipped lower, the cold deepened, and though the street emptied, the weight of judgment hung heavy still. The widow and the children had won a reprieve, but only that. Red Hollow was a place slow to forget, slow to forgive, and whispers had a way of turning into torches before long. That night, as Lien lit the fire in her cabin and wrapped the twins in quilts patched with her own weary hands, she felt the walls of her world pressing close. For the first time since finding the girls, she wondered if saving them might cost them all. Yet as the flames warmed their faces and the bold one whispered once more, "Don't be afraid, Mama," she found the strength to believe that some bonds were worth any fight, even against the whole town. But beyond the warmth of the fire, beyond the hush of the prairie, boots stirred in the dark. Men with purpose, driven by greed and fear, already moved to see that Red Hollow's judgment would not wait for proof. The storm had only begun. The night air was brittle, the kind of cold that seeped into a man's bones and made the silence of prairie feel louder than gunfire. The town had gone to sleep uneasy, doors barred and lamps burning longer than usual, as though everyone sensed a reckoning that hung just out of sight. At the edge of town, beyond the blackened cottonwoods where the fire pit's glow still fought against the dark, Evelyn sat across from Gray Hawk, her hands wrapped tight around a tin cup she hadn't sipped from. Neither spoke at first. The crackle of pine log was enough, sparks flying like fleeting stars, illuminating the hard lines of his face and the strain in hers. She had not wept openly, though her eyes burned as though the tears were forever waiting. He had not shifted, not once, sitting in that stoic stillness that made him seem carved from stone. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "They won't forgive me." Her voice was low, nearly swallowed by the fire. "I brought you into my cabin when they would have rather seen you left to bleed in the dirt, and for that I am branded a traitor to my own people." Gray Hawk's gaze lifted from the flames, steady, piercing. "You did not do it for them." Her lips trembled. "No, I did it because I could not watch a man die, not when I had the means to save him. But now the town looks at me as though I've chosen sides, as if my compassion were a weapon turned against them." "You chose truth," Gray Hawk said, his words deliberate, "and truth has always been the enemy of fear." The fire popped sharply, echoing the tension that laced the air. Evelyn drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe her actions had not doomed her, but every look she received in town told her otherwise. Mothers had pulled children away from her. Men had spat in the dirt when she passed. Reverend Cole had warned her that no good woman would risk her soul in such company. "I am not sure I'm strong enough," she whispered, mostly to herself. "You are stronger than you know." Gray Hawk's voice softened, though it did not waver. "When you pulled me from death, you did not think of strength. You simply acted. That is the measure of courage." Her eyes searched his, finding no mockery, no hollow comfort, just conviction. Yet, deep down, she feared his words would not be enough to shield her from what was coming. Because something was coming. She could feel it in the air, like a storm pressing at the horizon. And she was right. From the shadows beyond the firelight came the sound of boots crunching frost-hardened earth. Both turned sharply. Evelyn's heart lurched. Out of the dark stepped Marshal Tate, his figure broad and grim against the night. Behind him followed 3 men, townsfolk, each carrying rifles slung with ease, faces tight with intent. "Evening, Miss Evelyn," Tate drawled, though there was no politeness in it. His eyes fixed on Gray Hawk with cold hostility. "Reckon you know why I'm here." Evelyn rose, heart hammering. "Marshal, he's done nothing. He's not a threat." "Not a threat." Tate spat into the dirt. "This man's people raided wagons not 6 months back. Good settlers buried because of his kind. And you'd have us believe he ain't a danger sitting right here in our backyard?" Gray Hawk stood slowly, meeting Tate's gaze without flinching. His posture was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet defiance. "I came here wounded. I fought no battle against your town. Yet you hunt me as though I were prey." One of the townsmen stepped forward, rifle half raised. "Marshal, let's just finish this. Folks are restless. The longer he breathes, the longer no one sleeps right." Evelyn moved between them instinctively, her body trembling but her stance unwavering. "You'll not harm him," she said, voice breaking but fierce. "Not while I stand here." Tate's jaw tightened. "Step aside, Evelyn. You don't know what you're protecting." "I know enough," she shot back. "I know a man who bled on my floor, whose only crime was being born Cheyenne in a land where fear blinds good men. And I know that killing him now won't bring back those wagons, won't mend the grief you carry. It will only make murderers of you all." Her words hung in the air, trembling with firelight. The men shifted, uneasy. But Tate's expression remained hard as iron. "You're a fool, woman," he said finally. "Blinded by sympathy, that'll get you strung up alongside him. But the law's clear, he can't stay." Gray Hawk's hand brushed lightly against Evelyn's arm. "Do not waste yourself for me." His voice was low, meant for her alone. "If my path ends here, let it not take yours too." But Evelyn shook her head fiercely. "No, I will not stand aside. If they mean to kill you, they'll have to look me in the eye while they do it." The standoff thickened, the fire spitting sparks that danced upward like fleeting souls. Tate's men shifted again, uncertain, but no one lowered their weapon. Then, like a thunderclap, another voice cut through the night. "Enough!" All turned. From the darkened trail, lantern in hand, came Reverend Cole. His black coat flapped in the night wind, his face stern, lit by conviction. He stepped into the circle of firelight, eyes sweeping over the scene. "This is not justice," he declared. "This is vengeance masquerading as law." Tate bristled. "Reverend, you've no say in how I keep order. You keep order by stoking fear." Cole's voice rang clear, startling even the armed men. "Have you forgotten the words we preach on Sunday? Mercy, compassion, the worth of every soul? Or do those words vanish when the man before you bears the skin of another people?" The fire hissed. No one moved. Evelyn's breath caught, her heart surging with desperate hope. Reverend Cole pressed forward, his lantern casting shadows across the men's wavering faces. "If you spill blood here tonight, it will not cleanse this town. It will stain it. Forever." For the first time, Tate faltered, his grip on the rifle loosened slightly. His men looked uncertain, glancing at one another, waiting for someone else to decide. And in that fragile pause, Gray Hawk spoke, his voice quiet yet carrying the weight of a promise. "I did not come to bring war to your homes, but I will not run in chains either. If you seek blood, take mine. But know this, each death begets another. Each fire you set only spreads." His words struck like a hammer. They were not threats, but truth laid bare. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Tate exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. "Get him gone, then," he muttered, "out of town by dawn. If he stays, I won't hold my men back again." With that, he turned, motioning the others. Reluctantly, they followed, their boots crunching into the night until only the sound of crackling fire remained. Evelyn's knees nearly gave out. She clutched the shawl at her chest, her breath ragged with relief and lingering fear. Gray Hawk's hand steadied her gently, and for the first time, she leaned into his strength without resistance. Reverend Cole set down his lantern. "The Lord tests us in strange ways," he murmured, gazing at them both. "But tonight, mercy won out over wrath. Hold to that. He turned and left, his lantern bobbing away until the dark reclaimed him. Evelyn stared into the flames, her soul heavy yet strangely alight. "You'll have to leave," she whispered. "But Her words faltered. "I don't want you to." Greyhawk looked at her, the fire reflecting in his eyes like twin embers. "The world is wide, yet rare are the souls who see beyond its walls. You are such a soul. Do not doubt the path you've chosen. It carries weight, but also honor." Tears welled, but this time she let them fall. "And if the town turns me out, then you will not walk alone." The word struck her heart with equal parts fear and hope. She searched his face and for the first time allowed herself to believe redemption was possible. Not just for him, but for herself, for the town, perhaps even for the endless divide that had carved itself into the land. The fire burned low, sparks drifting heavenward like prayers unspoken. Tomorrow would bring exile, uncertainty, perhaps even greater trials. But tonight, by firelight, they had won something more precious than safety. They had chosen to stand together, and in that choice lay redemption.